No, we're okay. You're all right? Okay. Tonight we will finish the karmic section. Oh, Mitova. We're looking at the last two verses. I'm on page 12. We're doing the wheel-turning king and then the conflagration passage. Piru Chuanlun Wang, Chengjiu Sheng Qibao, Lai Chu Bu Ge De, Yi Ying Yi Ru Shi, You Ru Zhu Shi Jie, Da Huo Suo Shao Ran, Si Huo Wai Lai Wu Lai Chu, Yi Ying Yi Ru Shi. Okay, so the two verses closing up this section, the first one says, although a wheel-turning king possesses, or you could say wheel-turning king, singular, plural, there's usually said to be four, possesses the seven splendid jewels, no source of their origin can be found, and just so is the nature of karma. The closing line again repeats, and were all the worlds consumed by a massive conflagration, that fire would have no source. Thus again is the nature of karma. So again, the emphasis is it doesn't literally mean there's no source. There's just no source that we can trace or detect, because the way the karma works over the immediate, the next life and future lives, and the accumulation of this, only someone with incredible spiritual abilities can trace and see this. And so, on one hand, the origin is not obvious. Maybe that's a better way. Can be found by ordinary living beings is another way of looking at this. Obviously, if you look at the biographies and autobiographies of great cultivators, starting with the Buddha, part of their awakening is to see this source. They see where it comes from. They see how the 10,000 things, the myriad things they call them, arise from mind or consciousness alone. That's part of the insight. And then apparently upon that time, they're able to see the whole network of their own past lives as it was driven by cause and effect. And part of that awakening then is obviously very profound, because if you can see exactly why you're in the situation you're in now, and can see the patterns of that in life after life, this is, I mean, there's no other word to say, but this is one aspect of great wisdom. And we take it as a matter of principle, perhaps a matter of trust, but that's only an initial response to it. The idea of this is, even though it's taken perhaps as trust or hypotheses, we too are exhorted to see this and know this directly. And how that can be done is very simple. Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, the three non-upload studies, is presented as the methodology. Very simple methodology, very hard to perfect. You get the equivalent of the Dharmic Nobel Prize if you can pull this off in one lifetime. One session, one day, one sit. And yet the texts say it's not beyond a single thought. Whoa, okay. So the wheel-turning kings, Master Hua's commentary on this, and I can't say much myself about wheel-turning kings. I've never met one. I don't know. I'm just being honest. I don't know who they are. They're presented in the text, along with many other beings, some of which I do know about, and many of which are beyond my ken at this point. When it says no source or origin can be found, Master's commentary is ultimately, where did these things come from? Now, he's referring to the jewels. But you could also say, where did the kings come from? These two, in the Buddhist sense, are made from the mind alone. So all beings of the 10 realms, the whole spectrum of existence, is all coming from that mind. This mind is Buddha, this mind is demon, this mind is living being, this mind is sage, depending on how we use it. So the source can be determined on that. But I think what Master Hua is saying too, so too these things like these 7 precious jewels, they too come about through cause and effect. So when he says ultimately where do they come from, such a place is unreachable, I put parentheses, to us. It cannot be known from what place they come. But then he says, but I know. So, okay. How does he know? That's a very good question. It's one of the questions of philosophy called epistemology. How is it that we know things? But Master Hua would say, you ask how I know, I ask how you don't know. And he'd throw it back at us. Anyhow, he says they come from the wheel-turning sage king's various previous practices of virtue and wholesome deeds when the king was at the stage of planting causes. So this analysis that he gives you is very simple, but you think, at the stage when the king was not a king, simply what they called the ground of causation, the causation ground, planting of seeds. At that stage, this person, this individual who later becomes this wheel-turning king, is extremely careful in cause and effect, protecting and cultivating virtue and wholesome deeds. And this could refer to the 10 wholesome deeds, but basically it's just anything that isn't bringing harm to oneself or others. That's refraining. You can practice wholesome deeds by just not doing unwholesome, but you can also positively practice wholesome deeds by doing something. So it has a negative and positive. The very least you want, start with a negative. Just refrain from, don't do anything dumb, stupid, or harmful. Right. Hence we have repentance and reform, because the first swing at that doesn't always deliver. But then you start to get in, for example, some of the paramitas have to do with the positive wholesome deeds, giving. Let's see, patience, bigger, generosity, kindness. And there you're actively going out. And here the trick is to make sure that that's coming from a purely intrinsic motivation and not instrumental. Virtue is said to have 2 aspects, intrinsic virtue and instrumental virtue. Instrumental virtue is quid pro quo. Do you know that expression? Everybody knows Latin here. This is wonderful. Quid pro quo, this for that, transactional. I do this deed, which is a good deed, but I'm doing it with the idea of a return either from you. In other words, I'm binding you in a gift-giving exchange kind of thing, or I'm just saying I want a return in my spiritual. And so I do virtue as an investment portfolio. Okay? Intrinsic means it's done for its own sake. There's not a thought that I'm going to do this to get something out of it. I do it because it needs to and should be done, and even that's too slow. It just happens because that's your orientation. This is called true virtue. The virtue that's done instrumentally or transactionally, which there's a lot of, and now there's even, I can't say there's a lot of it because there's not a lot of virtue right now. So everything that's done is transactional without any virtue intent. Sorry, my editorial. When you do it though, and you have that ulterior motive, that slight ulterior motive, the language, the poetic language of that is called the thief within the virtue. In other words, right within the virtue, there's a thief that steals away some of the light of that. Okay. When at the stage of planting causes, wholesome and virtue was that. And all that wholesome karma created comes from the blessings he obtains now as a wheel-turning king. So there is this return. Again, in the realm, these are basically, I would say, my understanding, these are it's a 6 path still. So you have the hells, animals, and ghost. This is 3 of the destinies. You have people, more or less everybody here that I can see, people, asuras, and devas. And so the wheel-turning kings are in the deva, the heavenly realms. And so they have this And then Master Wa goes on, he says, all the evil karma we created through all our past lives will reap an evil retribution, as will all the wholesome karma created reap a wholesome reward. So when the bad karma we created in the past is more than the good karma, we undergo that much more suffering. So it's actually, there's probably a metric here of some sort. I don't know exactly how to work it. But this is where it gets complicated, because you're working with metrics that measure good and bad, day to day, year to year, life to life, over long periods of time. And they don't always have the equal weight to them. We went through this earlier a couple of weeks ago on the weightiness of certain deeds done with full intention, full evil in mind, as opposed to some hesitation, not intentional, and so forth. So when you start to say there's a metric here, there may be, but it's so complex to figure out what it is. But basically, Master was saying here, when one is greater than the other, then a suffering. What kind of suffering? Again, differences of degree. It is still suffering. It could be just a mild irritation, a kind of mild sense of displacement. Things aren't going well for me. It's not like it's really bad, but it's not very meaningful. And usually a lot of things I try to do, they just don't quite succeed. They get a little, it's okay, but it's, it's kind of meh. So there's not real satisfactoriness, but there's not this profound suffering of disease and terminal illness and extreme poverty and so forth. And then along that continuum. But what the text is saying, along that continuum, you're never outside the law of cause and effect. It's not like, oh, this happens because of bad karma, and this was just chance or an accident. It doesn't work that way. Anyway, it reminded me of you cannot know its origin, you cannot know what it is. Basically, it's more like you don't recognize. And I think maybe that would be a better translation here. I just thought of that. Let's go back. Can I do that? Those of you who know Chinese, let's see. Yeah, where they come from, the origin can't be found. But that's de. De means to obtain, to get at. But it can also mean to access and to recognize. And so I'd say a better rendering of this is we can't recognize where it comes from, rather than we can't know. There's a quote from Albert Schweitzer. Who's Albert Schweitzer? He's got an ice cream chain? Stores? Albert Schweitzer, nobody? Okay, he was a German physician, very skillful and talented. And now I digress. You study history, you pick up all this stuff in your dustbin, and then when you start to dig in, all these, it's like a house, and you put things in the closet or the basement, and then you're going, oh my God, oh look at that, and then you just end up spending a lot of time in the basement. I do this. And sometimes you don't even have a basement, it just piles up, and so the bottom of the pile is your basement, so to speak. Anyway, Schweitzer was also a gifted musician, an organist, and put out played compositions of Bach organ pieces to loving and acclaiming crowds. And he was well established, very successful, and then had this impulse. I don't know exactly why, but I think maybe he made an initial trip or vacation to Africa and saw the absolute gap between his world in Germany and what most people were living at that time in the turn of the century in Africa. And particularly because he was a doctor, the unnecessary death and the dying from diseases that could be cured and treated but just weren't being done. And so he completely renounced everything he had in Germany and moved to Africa and set up his clinic there and became, in a sense, you could say, one of the first Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders sort of thing. And I read his autobiography when I was quite young, and it really inspired me. If you check it out, I think it might be called Out of My Life in Thought or something. But one line in there really struck me. his principle that he steered his life by was simply this: I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. And so he developed a reverence for life philosophy, and then used that as the basis of his medical practice, but also on the basis of whole life. In any event, the quote I was going to give you tonight is not that one. That definitely inspired me, but he said, man can hardly even recognize the devils of his own creation. Man can hardly even recognize the devils of his own creation. There's a karmic sense there of once we create these things, we don't recognize them anymore, either because of a sense of denial and shame, and therefore we can't admit that this is something we brought about, or we move on and forget that the deeds don't move on. That's the whole nature of karma. Deeds, once committed, don't disappear. They have consequences that go on and ripen over time. And so when the ripening comes, we don't recognize them as the results of our own creations, but rather somebody else laying something on us, or fate, or anything like that. So we go on. I mentioned, we're going to finish tonight this section, Kent. So, well, at least we'll finish the verses. And were all the worlds consumed by a massive conflagration, that fire would have no source. Thus, again, is the nature of karma. No source recognizable to us. It would be adharmic to say it doesn't have a source. You know what I'm saying? So without commentary and without probing this, you could easily go away and saying, oh, there's no source, therefore there's no causative origin, therefore everything is just chance and fate and capricious. There's no cause and effect, which would change the whole structure, the moral structure of this teaching, and lead to basically a nihilistic, amoral position. So you have to be careful when it says it would have no source. It would be no source that we can recognize once. And if you think about it, let's give an example. There's a massive fire, say in Northern California or Los Angeles, these massive fires, and they spend a lot of time. Once the fire is going, they don't know. Where did it start? What's its source? So they do. There's a whole investigative team and sometimes they don't find it. Sometimes they don't find it. They're still trying to pin out exactly where it begins. Now, if you imagine this fire as a conflagration that goes for centuries or something, or lifetimes, and you're in the middle of that, you would have no way of tracing it back. So widespread and all-consuming is it over a long period of time that you'd forget that it had an origin. You'd almost think that this is the way things are. So Master Wa's commentary here, were we to trace the fire's cause back over a long period of time, we would find it to be what? You want to fill in the blank? Here we have, fill in the blank. Okay, quiz. He says, we would trace the fire's cause over a long period of time, we would find it to be blank. Friday night quiz time. Then, nobody? No source. Who said that? Now, see, he's good. If I say that's right, you go, I said it. If he says wrong, somebody online. Yeah, okay. The answer Master Wa gives, we would find it to be people's karma. People's karma. A fire of this, and he calls it a culpic fire. So this is going into another way of looking at the passage of time over long periods of time, and measured in kalpas, immense periods of time. But there's a culpic fire, he talks about it. But even though that's the case, it's people's karmic retribution. But were you to try to find an immediate source of the fire, you could not find one. If you understand the power of karma, you would know it to be where a karmic fire, culpic fire came from. That is the meaning of no source. So again, going along with my intuitions here, he's basically saying the no source is you can't quite see it when you're in the midst of it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have a source. And so it is, finishing his commentary, that every world undergoes a period of coming into being, a period of, this is a translation, you could say abiding, stasis is another word, of normalcy or enduring, sort of. And then there's a period of decay or deterioration and a period of, translated literally, returning to emptiness. So just as you have 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, winter being the absolute end, we're now in a period right now of the beginning of a cycle. Spring, everything's green. I look at my back light, there's 5 or 6 kinds of flowers, everything's alive. Just months ago, there wasn't anything on the branches, it was very dead and whatnot. So too in the human being, we have a period of spring, summer, winter, fall, winter. My fall's gone, I'm now into winter. Some of you are into fall, some of you are into spring. Some of you not here haven't even begun spring, but it's coming. Planets do this, people do this, cells do this. At the micro level, you have cells that have a process coming, being, whatnot, and then going. So the Avatamsaka later will come to a passage. It's very interesting. It says basically all worlds are created or arise and are sustained by and declined from the living beings who dwell there. So now it's entering a kind of interconnection between us as individual living beings, us as collective living beings being together, making decisions individually and making decisions collectively. For example, an election is a collective choice or decision that generates certain causes and conditions that create impacts, and so forth. So, in a sense, when you have government, you have a collective body that is where you're going to build, what kind of housing regulations, what resources you're going to develop, and so forth, who you're going to go to war with. All of this becomes a collective, and degrees of responsibility accrue to where you are in that chain. You could be instigating it, you could be just going along because you don't want to stick your neck out a little bit. You could be indirectly supporting it. I just saw that they're still doing trials for men and women who did not directly participate in the actual genocide, say, of World War II, but indirectly stamped the papers, said it was okay, just came in and did their job every day, knowing exactly what was happening, but they themselves never turned the switch or pulled the trigger. Nonetheless, by law, they are still found guilty. The last one was this woman now, I think in her late 80s or 90s, finally came to trial just last week. And she knew, but she just did her job, so to speak. So all of that we're doing here, either directly or indirectly, going along with it, instigating it, and I would say sometimes the karma of resisting it is a counteractive karma. And so that's an interesting thing that happens, and that's why within the same place and same time, different people have different results. They may be collectively joined because they were part of a similar event or same event, but they're not getting the same thing because of their participation or lack of participation makes a difference, changes the scale of things. It's very complex. But in the Avatamsaka is basically, because the worlds are sustained and brought about and declined by the people that dwell there, this is called, there's a term, technical term, it's called dependent retribution. So in cause and effect, there's one called proper retribution. Proper retribution refers to your immediate individual karma that you have brought about. Dependent retribution refers to the circumstances and surrounding environment conditions that are brought about indirectly from the proper. And so it's your body, your mind, your longevity, your good or bad health, and so on and so forth, is all part of your proper to you. The dependent is the co-arising, co-conditional. It's sometimes linked with pratitya samutpada, the conditioned arising. So what happens and what Master was describing and what the text is describing in the Avatamsaka goes, and this is partly what the Avatamsaka means by interpenetrating without obstruction, that the proper and the dependent start to have an interactive dimension to them. So in Master Wa's commentary, he goes into basically saying there's disasters that come about as fire disasters, disasters that are water disasters. Do you know where I'm going? What would be the others? Air disasters, wind. Earth disaster, or wood. And finally, AI. No, metal. So you're taking the 5 essential: earth, air, fire, water, metal. And basically what the text is saying, what Master was saying, when these are out of balance, when they're misused and abused and not held in proper relationship, that creates disasters. Those disasters can happen quickly, or they can happen over periods of time. This works also in Chinese medicine, is the internal world, so to speak, where you have those 5 elements working. So if they're in the whole, I'm on my realm here, Locke, but help me, but basically the idea of the medicine is to keep, not to eliminate earth, air, fire, water, but to keep them in balance, to keep them in an interrelated harmony. So much of Chinese medicine has to do with restoring balance, bringing things back to this harmony. So just as you have this on the micro, in Chinese cosmogony, you have it on the macro. So the elements, the larger elements, earth, air, fire, water, metal, and the internal, are operating, they're just micro, macro variations of the same thing. That's this correlative model, it's called, correlated model. So I was thinking about it maybe in a more modern sense of just looking at a few things to see how this might work out. So if you take sort of the element of water and chemical being watery kind of, we can see that human activity getting out of balance and abusing that became, in my era, DDT. Everybody know DDT? What is DDT? Insecticide, right. Mm-hmm. And it was going to make the world a perfect place with no bugs and mosquitoes anymore. And it was effective. Unfortunately, it also killed off a lot of other things. And if you want to read about this, and here's my pitch for you to please read. Put down your cell phones, or you could read it on your cell phone, I don't care, but read it. Called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson was just a wonderful scientist. Really, she did all her original work on the ocean and oceanography, but she discovered this interrelatedness of the natural world. And so she began to discover that, how did it start? These birds were misformed, their beaks were bent, their eggs were not hatching properly. And then she traced it to the fish they were eating. And when she traced the fish to the worms and things that were coming out of Earth, and sure enough, the saturation of DDT, and she noticed that as you go down in DDT, it starts to accumulate in the fatty tissue, and the higher up you go, the more lethal it becomes. And so she did the work on this, and everybody said, oh my God, thank you. And she wrote this book, Silent Spring, where she described waking up one morning when spring wasn't there anymore. And it wasn't there because the bugs and insects and the whole chain of a biodiverse system had been so wiped away that it was a sterile world. And she was well received. No, she was pilloried and persecuted, almost to the point of death, because it went against not only the prevailing paradigm that people had, particularly after World War II, that we're going to make the world better chemically to live in. This is the new God, was chemistry, but because she cut into profits of the chemical companies. So they launched a campaign that was just ugly beyond means to vilify her. Nonetheless, she prevailed, and DDT was banned. Now here's where you have mixed karma. The bad karma of creating this largely wasn't just to get rid of insects, it was to make money for these companies. And a lot of these companies thought, okay, we've made money on weapons of destruction during World War II, what are we going to do when the war is over? What do we do if peace breaks out? Well, they had to find some way to keep the productive manufacturing going, so they started to invest in this. I'm not going to mention the companies, you know, who I'm talking about, right? And so they launched campaigns against her, things like, oh, the science isn't really in yet, it's not complete. Some scientists disagree with that, you know. We don't have all the facts we need. Besides, it's bad for the economy. These chemicals create jobs, and, you know, this kind of thing. So, in any event, she was right, and they did ban it, but keeping with, what did they do with it? They exported it to third world countries then. Same thing happened with tobacco. So what you're watching is, yes, it's good they stopped it, but then they pass it on to that. So now we're in a stage where we have a new version of that emerging, what are called forever chemicals. Okay, so these come from what? Anybody been following this discussion? I'm sorry if I'm going to break your heart tonight and tell you these horrible stories. Yeah, these are forever chemicals. They're invented in the 1930s. They repel water and oil and grease and makes them ideal for many consumer products. Your clothes, the carpets, upholstery, so on and so forth. They're usually put together, it's called PFAS. That's the acronym for them. It's a group of chemicals that added to the products starting in the 1950s, consumer products. And they allowed grease and dirt to slide off of carpets and textiles. And I always remember these ads when I was growing up, especially for my parents who came through the Depression, and we were on a farm, so the farm was messy and dirty. But all of a sudden you saw these housewives in these clean aprons and their hair done, walking around their kitchens with all these chemicals, spraying that, wiping this off. Everything was just so convenient and modern. You're like, oh. And people in the other countries thought, oh, America's really got it made. And really, it's just basically spreading poison. Yeah, I'm laughing. What else do you do? So that allowed them to do, and it also worked to protect industrial equipment from heat damage and corrosion. So it was, and helped to smooth the skin. So we put it in cosmetic products as well. Isn't this funny? Like if I told you a story that you were taking horrible chemicals, you'd say, oh, that's science fiction, and there you were cleaning. They're also used in jet engines, medical devices, refrigeration systems, construction, electrical, so forth. Now, they're called microplastics. What happens with these, as they break down, they don't disappear. And they're found now everywhere science is looking. They're found on remote islands that didn't even have them. So they transfer through water and air because they're so small and volatile. They're found in the fresh snow of Antarctica. Whoa. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific, and food and water and the air we breathe and take in. And they're finding them spread out throughout the human body internally. Moreover, they take hundreds of thousands of years to degrade after they've been used and thrown away. This means they leak into the soil and the water, which they often do, and they could remain there for centuries. So where am I going? We don't recognize this is where the source is. We go and the doctor says, you know, oops, you got this or you got that. How did it? We don't know. We don't know what caused it. We don't recognize what caused it. So what do these plastics do to the human organs is now a subject of intense study. So if you want to get a PhD in this area, go back to school. When they look at these microplastics and look at tissue samples in the laboratory, it can result in cell death in the body, immune reactions and tissue damage. Hundreds of studies of exposed animals, and this is again, now you're going to the next level. We're using animals to torture them and expose them to this to find out how stupid this is. And so now we're complicating the karma. We're saying we want to help people, but at the same time we're destroying animals to help people. So there's a mixed karmic bag. And I say, people say, oh yes, indeed, you need to do this, absolutely necessary. Here, Poochie Poochie, let me do Poochie Poochie. Oh, my little Poochie Poochie. Well, what if some scientist wants your little Poochie for the experiment? Oh no, we just use monkeys and rats and things. Well, the monkey and rats is somebody's kid, come on, in the animal realm. But this is that sort of maldistribution of ethics, in a sense, that we have a kind of ethical code for our placards on our front lawn, and then we have an ethical behavior in our backyard, which is a little different. Anyhow, I don't want to get into that. They're found in their guts. They can clog their guts, and they mess up reproduction. They're linked to cancer, heart and kidney disease, Alzheimer's, fertility issues in people, and big-time carcinogenic. Now, when Sherwood's commentary was, he said it's the water that causes it's the watery thing that is the cancer disaster. And they're endocrine disruptors. You know what endocrine disruptors are? Alice, he must know what an endocrine disruptor is, right? Yeah. The endocrine, man, when I discovered that in college, I was like, whoa. Because endocrines are so powerful, they're so small, the hormonal levels and whatnot. You fall in love, you fall into hate. All of this is driven by those endocrines. And then I found out at my age they were wild. I don't even know if they're tame now, but they were really wild there. You were just doing crazy things and you didn't even know why. It was because your endocrine system was just going, woo! Anyhow, some people grow out of it, some don't. These affect the endocrine disruptors, impacting the fine balance of hormones in the body. So this then, if you understand the relationship between psychology and biology, could be a factor in an increase of hyperactivity behaviors, could be increase in miscarriages, could be increase in basically the whole autism spectrum thing that they're trying to get at. And here's the thing. With science, it always wants to find one cause and one effect, and it feels it's nailed it. But in fact, the world we live in, and the text is talking about the interpenetration. You have this interpenetration of all these things that collectively can cause this to happen, but you can't know its source, and therefore you feel as if you're not in charge of it. But we've accumulated so many factors weighing in that now they have a profound effect, and yet we can't trace it one to one. Anyhow, now the other thing is they're largely unregulated. So I just did a thing with one of my little nieces. I was making her something. She says, "Oh," I said, "What?" "I'm not going to eat that." I said, "What? You like veggie burgers, but you're using that pan." "What pan?" "That nonstick pan." "Well, otherwise it sticks." And I had, "Oh no." She says, and she went into this whole thing that she learned somewhere. Maybe she learned it in school, but if present educational policy holds, she won't know this. She will not know its source, she not know her source, because it'll be disruptive to, how do they put it? It'll cause her to be uncomfortable. So we won't have any DEI, but we also won't have any education whatsoever on anything that's factual or scientific. Everything's okay as long as the cash register is going. And so basically it's unregulated, poo-pooed by the chemical companies making them. There was an international attempt, like climate change attempt, to address this problem last year in South Korea. And it was reported this way. There's the report. More than 100 countries want a treaty to limit production as well as to tackle the cleanup and recycling of these forever chemicals. And many have said that it's essential, existential, to address these chemicals of concern. But, as the article went, for some plastic producing in oil gas countries, that crosses a red line. What's the red line? Money, money, money. And so here, it says it's just past the point of acceptable. So they're going to go on. They won't lose money, but they're going to lose life. So here's a disaster where you don't recognize its source. It's growing now. It's fed by greed. And yet, we don't try to, we pretend we don't know. this is very difficult. But I'm just trying to, here's a modern example where Sherp was saying over time, little things like this add up to big disasters, and yet when it comes, we don't know. And yet we do know, kind of, all along. So when the countries have a thing like this, they know. The science is pretty clear on this, and it's getting clearer every day. And so choosing not to know at that point is a karmic choice. And it's not because of lack of knowledge, it's because of lack of humaneness. This is why, I hate to go on about this, but a new area is developing in ethics called intergenerational ethics. And it's basically asking the question, what do we owe those who are coming after us? Not immediately now, that's an ethical realm. But the things that we're working with have such profound effects over time, we have to ask the question, what are our responsibilities and accountabilities for the generations yet to be born? Because they will feel the impacts of these choices and decisions we're making. It's just not us. And you say, okay, I choose to ruin my life or whatnot. And my niece is right. If I use this stuff, wash it in the pan, in the water, and gets into the whole system, it's going to affect her and her children as well. So it's a whole level. And basically, it's a opportunity to expand karmic consciousness, to bring it up to the interrelated realm and take it out of just me and mine. But it's also ignored the presage of a great disaster. So I was going to go into a couple of other things, but I think I will pause there for tonight, maybe talk about this a little bit next week. The other thing I want to talk about is this culpic fire that Master was talking about. We could see it as some kind of strange, almost science fiction event, right? Like you see in the movies, the fire comes, the earth crisps out like a marshmallow, and blah, blah, blah. But you could also see it, every year, every day that we're getting hotter and hotter here. The temperature is going up. Now it's going up slowly, but no, not really. From a scientific point of view, it's going up almost exponentially. We know this. The earth is getting hotter and hotter. I just looked at some of the reports from India and Pakistan, and we're talking 130 degrees, where people literally, even with cooling systems, cannot. And the cooling systems draw on the same energy that creates the global warming, blah, blah, blah. So we could see this fire as, I read Avatamsaka talked about a big fire coming to the earth and it's down the road, blah, blah, blah. No, it's happening right now. It doesn't have to be, this massive flame thing. It could be the rising temperatures that basically dry out the earth, use up the water, and slowly people die from the fire element, not quickly. So it's like, this brings it back to the here and now. And from Master Wa's point of view, these sutras are not about a then and there or a previous time. They're about here and now. And they have everything to do with us. And he said, if you follow the principles of the sutra, you can correct your lives and set them on a good course. If you ignore them, you do it at your own peril. But they have messages and principles by which to guide and live now, not simply windows into the past or into some indefinite future where it's going to come down. This thing, karma, brings it right down to the mechanism that allows you to either be controlled or to control it. So it's a really, really important one. Anyhow, I wanted to quote you that line because I didn't do it right. This is from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And it says, you are what your deepest desire is. You are what your deepest desire is. As is your desire, so is your intention. Now intention, cetana, is also used in the Buddhist sense. This is karma. But karma is preceded by your deepest desire. As your desire is, it becomes your intention. Could be really purposeful, or it could be just neglect. You allow your desire to just sort of take over. And as your desire, intention is, so is your will. So intention, and as your will, so is your deed. And as your deed, so is your destiny. This is from the Upanishad. So it's tracing back. When the destiny happens, and I'm taking it back to the Avatamsaka now, we may not see its source. We may not recognize it. But we can do the reverse engineering. The destiny came from the deed. The deed came from the will. The will was fed by the intention, and the intention was fed by the deepest desire, recognized or not. So I guess maybe what I'm saying here is the purpose of cultivation from the text and from Master Hua is really get back to recognize in yourself, know your mind. And that means knowing in the smallest of places what those desires are. Some are harmless. Some are really not desires, but inspirations. And you can follow those. And some are really unwholesome and selfish and narrow. And you can't be sloppy about it. You know, you can be sloppy about it. Don't get me wrong. That would be stupid. Everybody's sloppy about it. You can be sloppy about it, but there's no escaping that this is the dynamic mechanism that's driving destiny. Our destiny as individuals, but the destiny of all those that we're interrelated with. So there's no, the Bodhisattva is not dealing with some kind of wish to be kind and generous to all beings. The Bodhisattva, he or she, is recognizing that all beings are in fact interconnected. There's a biodiversity interconnectedness to the whole web of life in this world, just as it is with nature. I just saw this great explanation why tree plantations won't do what a biodiverse forest will do in terms of absorbing carbon. Tree plantations take out all the interconnectedness, the fungi, the animals, and everything, and just say trees do it, and they plant them in rows. But if you look at the research, the only way to really do it, take carbon out of the atmosphere, is with these diverse forests where everything is interconnected, mutually feeding and supporting each other. It's really amazing. That's what the Avatamsaka is talking about. And this is true of the human realm. So I guess what you could say it's getting at is reality is interconnectedness. And ignorance is a sort of a self-sealed, autonomous, rights-bearing individual, which is nowhere to be found. I just saw a wonderful cartoon. Somehow a mother was saying to this son, you can take your self-realized, anarchistic, postmodern ego and remember you would have none of it except for your mother. Something like that. It was a wonderful cartoon, but it's basically saying, you know, and who's feeding you, who's wiping your butt, and all this thing. You're not some radical individual here that, no. That doesn't stop when mothering's done, because we are being mothered all the time. The food we eat comes from a mothering. The water we drink comes from a mothering. The air we breathe, all of this is coming from a caregiving system of interrelatedness. So anyhow. Enough on that for tonight. Next week, I will go on with some more and read you. Maybe tonight, I was going to tell you a story from the pilgrimage or a poem. Which would you rather have? I'll take an extra 5 minutes to do it. I apologize to those who want to go to sleep. Poem or story? Poem? Poem's shorter, story's longer. And I don't know which one's better. Both. There we go. The mind agreed. Maybe I'll do the poem tonight. The story is about the story I called The Cheesecake Demon. But let me do the poem. And the reason I'm doing the poem is I had I just hopped in my car and drove up to Redwood Vihara last Saturday after Friday night, and I need to get away sometimes, and I don't know what I think I'm getting away from. That's really ironic, you know. Well, maybe it's just to partly. I grew up in Wisconsin, and for the most part of my life, I was living among trees and plants and fields and flowers and streams. That was my world. Even in the quote city, which was a very small city, I'd hop on my bike. 3 blocks from my house, I'd be in a ravine with no people. And when I moved to California, I woke up in a cold sweat in Palo Alto one night, realizing I was surrounded by freeways. I felt like I was in a cage. I woke up and I realized, oh my God, all around me, I never had this feeling before. There were freeway, and planes overhead. And when I was a kid, I'd cross the road and I'd be into open space. And the further I go I could just wander forever. So my psychology, the way I grew up in the world was to have this unbounded open. And so when I'm in California, sometimes I need to pull away and get back to the woods, so to speak, get back to where there aren't those, and that's Redwood Vihara. So I went to Redwood Vihara. My legs are sore. Why are my legs sore? I drove there, I didn't run there. I went for walks at Redwood Vihara. And my legs said, "You wussies, your legs are so soft. I'm walking up and down those hills. Oh my gosh, different muscles completely. It's not sidewalks and asphalt, right?" And so, but it was a good hurt. But then at night, there's nothing. There's no sounds. There's no freeway surrounding. It's just wonderful. It's 500 plus acres of redwoods. Somehow I needed. So I'm not an advanced cultivator that every place is the same for me quite yet. But I know I can't stay there either, so then I have to come back and go back and forth and do this anyhow. So one of my favorite poets, as you know, is Tao Yan Ming, sometimes called Dao Qian, another name. And so he's the one that gives this wonderful nature poetry, connecting human nature to the natural world and using it as the natural world as a bridge back to your true nature, ripping away the pretensions and falseness and and so forth, and cosmetics and whatnot. So this one is, it doesn't have a title. I tentatively called it Carpe Diem. Do you know Carpe Diem? Seize the moment, seize the day, right? So this is a very short poem by him. He says, "Too poor to hire help. Too poor to hire help. We're being taken over by a wilderness tangle of trees." So the first line is, too poor to hire help. The trees in the garden, everything's overgrowing. And it's certainly what I felt at Redwood Vihara. I looked out and thought, okay, I'm going to clean up this place. Forget it. I mean, they had 6 guys out there for I don't know how long, putting piles and cleaning it up. And it was like, just cutting a little bit of your hair, because it's just overgrown and wild. So too poor to hire help, we're being taken over by a wilderness tangle of trees. All silence, birds drifting, clear skies, and isolate silence. There's no sign of others. Time and space go on forever, but who lives even to 100? He's just got this ability to say wilderness and then time and space go on, but who lives to be 100? Months and years tighten, bustling each other away, and my hair was already turning white long ago. If we don't give up failure and success, that promise we hold just turns to regret. It's a wonderful closing line. If we don't let go of what's false, fame and success, that promise that we hold to be truly wonderful, magnificent beings, just turns to regret. Wow. Do I have the Chinese? No, I don't actually. But there are people online and there are people here who could provide that for you. So just connect with Locke. I know, for example, who's translating tonight? Alan's wife knows all this stuff. So get in touch. Her name is Iwan. I just did it. I just introduced you to Iwan over, I'll get criticized for this, but when I have questions on that, I usually go to her. And if she doesn't know it, she can research and explain it. Her father was a literary professor in Taiwan of this materials. And it's really funny. It's like, I don't want to do that, Dad. I don't want to do that, Dad. I don't want to do that, Dad. And now what is she doing? She's doing that. Teaching Chinese literature and philosophy at DRBU. Any event, if you want to get in touch with her, she can give you. And actually, it's a good question in the sense that the actual poetic rhythm of this it doesn't come across quite with the translation, but really would come across with the Chinese. And I'm always amazed when we're working together, we'll do something like that, and I'll read the English, and she says, I wonder what the Chinese is. And she'll open it and she'll say, oh my God, this is so good. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what did I miss in the translation here? So there's something with the original. I suspect if you took T.S. Eliot or Emily Dickinson and translated them Chinese, you go, oh, that's okay. And then you read, in English, you go, oh my God, right? So anyhow, Good stuff. Matches a very key line from Huineng's Platform Sutra. And it goes, it says, if you don't get rid of fame and success, what does the closing line go? The promise we hold will just turn to regret. He says in one of his lines of the text, a frantic passage through life ends with bitter regret. And frantic means driven for fame and success, not frantic in the sense of fear, but self-generated franticness. Gotta get. Get what? Where are you going? What's it all about? What do you need past need? Oh, yeah. So anyhow, telling Ming next week I'll do, let's see, I want to give you the title of this because, yeah, the Cheesecake Demon. Okay. That'll be a story for next week. Sorry you didn't get both tonight. Okay. Any announcements? We will then do the transference. Yeah, you say, walking the hills of the redwood vihara, the streams gurgling, the birds flowering, and your body's going, oh. I mean, really, I didn't do it. I'm not good at geometry, but I swear to God, those hills have to be 65 degrees ascent. They're not 45. This is not Wisconsin. Okay. The bittersweet wilderness. Every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.